Welcome to the WEInvested podcast, where we dive deep into the minds shaping the future of finance and wealth creation. Today's guest is a true innovator in the crypto lending space, Shawn Owen, founder and CEO of Salt Lending. As one of the early visionaries in blockchain based lending, Shawn has helped unlock the value of digital assets, offering people a smarter, more flexible way to access liquidity. Get ready to learn how crypto backed loans work, the future of decentralized finance, and what it takes to build a groundbreaking fintech company. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing great, Wesley. It's a pleasure to be here with you and the listeners. We've been riffing on kind of the getting started conversation, so I'm really looking forward to just keep on talking. It's gonna be fun.
Absolutely, man. And before we get started, would you mind letting the people know where they can find you on the internet, whether it's your website or your social media accounts?
Yep. So www.salt, S-A-L-T, lending, like you're lending money.com. Salt like you put on a steak to make it taste good or whatever your flavor of food is. My name is Shawn Owen, Shawnowen. You can find me on Twitter. You name it. I'm out there everywhere. I'm on all the platforms. So would love to connect and chat with anybody who is hearing about this for the first time or is OG and loves this stuff and just wants to meet more people. I'm always interested in the community element, and we've got people always ready to talk at any point in time if we can help you out.
Absolutely, man. So let's start with your origin story. What inspired you to create Salt Lending, and how did your background lead you into the crypto space?
Okay, so my entrance into Bitcoin before crypto really was the topic of cryptocurrency, comes from actually being in hospitality, real estate, and investing, and really having the idea and the thesis around what I thought about money and what I thought I knew about money, that you build, invest in cash flow, and then someday you retire and you just keep on doing that. In 2008, I got really rocked by having invested into both stocks, bonds, and the real estate I had right at the peak before everybody got smoked. And that was a very scary experience, as many people who lived through that knew. It was particularly, I think, more terrifying than anything else I've really lived through at that point in time. So it's kind of hard to put in words. But that ended up being, say, 10 years before I finally really got back to where I was underwater. And for the next immediate year, 2008, 2009, it was like I was suddenly exposed to an entire different world of things that I'd never thought about. And I was on this deep learning curve. And that led me to think about alternative investing and listening to alternative perspectives, which led to thinking about how this even happened. Next thing you know, I'm researching gold and silver. I start really being upset that this has all happened and then I didn't know. I was mad at myself for thinking I knew so much and didn't. So it really reflected that I wanted to learn everything I possibly could. I started investing in precious metals, gold, silver, anything you could think of that was different from what I had been doing. And along the way, that kind of was a blessing in that I heard very early on technology. I'm normally a futurist, positive, just thinking about how can the future be better. Technology is usually the way that I think we get there. I hear early about Bitcoin, and it was kind of just on this random early podcast that was mostly about libertarian views and technology. And I kind of just had this eureka moment, aha moment where it melted my mind again and thought like, okay, this is the coolest thing ever, but I don't know anything about it. I want to learn about it. It was almost like I was just obsessed and called to it. Started converting all the computers I had into like trying to figure out how to mine. Started thinking about things like I started to give up on gold and silver because that was like I was trying to imagine a world where we're all interacting and bartering with silver, and it's just like it's very clunky, right? And it was a question of like, why has this never worked for money? And suddenly Bitcoin shows up and sounds like in theory it can solve these problems and it has all these qualities that are really interesting. So that became the beginning of me just wanting all my free time to go towards that. As I started down that route, I eventually got a hold of some Bitcoin, learned all the lessons the hard way, learned how to lose it mining, learned how to lose it investing, learned how to lose it trading, all the things, lost money on Mt. Gox and the rest of it. But I was just so passionate about it that started hosting meetups. And at the time I was in hospitality. So actually a company called Southern Hospitality, restaurant concept that at the time was produced by Justin Timberlake and Ryan Tedder of One Republic. And so we'd have this awesome restaurant, and I was all enthusiastic about Bitcoin. I didn't really want to talk about anything else. And so I started trying to figure out if there was people out there had meetups that people would show up on a Monday night and just sit around and drink water, pizza, beer, whatever. And I said, as long as we respectfully tip, we can use the space. That ended up allowing me to convince the company that we should accept Bitcoin to bring people in. This is 2012, 13. It sounded crazy because Silk Road just happened. But we were successful in being able to bring a bunch of people in. It went from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50. So next thing you know, over a year or so, we got 100 people showing up, all enthusiastic. And, I was doing everything from accepting Bitcoin for beers and barbecue and just hanging out with people to suddenly really wanting to say, is there something here? There's real companies coming and going. There's Coinbase showed up, BitPay, some early exchanges. And so I was heading down this idea of entrepreneurship and thinking, if this does actually become something like this would be great. I would love to just spend all my time doing this. That went through a bunch of iterations. Basically, long story short, as soon as the IRS came out in 2013 and said that you had to pay gains on it, and I started observing this pattern where everybody would love it, they would spend it, but they would immediately talk about hodling and going and buying more and figuring out how to get more. Nobody really wanted to give you their Bitcoin, right? Like they would do it to support, but it wasn't like anybody really wanted that. And then we start seeing some of the scaling topics show up for people who are around. That was this whole contentious period of time where the world went through this, what's Bitcoin going to be, turned into a fork war and a split into Bitcoin Cash. And so that kind of suddenly hit the aha moment of what I was seeing and what I wanted, what I needed, which is to be able to prove to people that I'm going to save this forever. And it should be on the balance sheet. And I should be able to go to the bank and have somebody at least give me some credit for it. Hey, I got to buy a car or whatever. And I have this over here. You guys recognize every other asset somehow or another. How come you won't recognize this? And that led to the idea of Salt. Historically, the name Salt with a group of founders was just this idea of, wouldn't it be cool if we could get this programmable money to be collateral and for we could save it forever and we'd still have a bridge to the future to spend cash. Salt was used as the term for salary. That's where that word comes from. It was also what people used to save wealth on, they put it on their food. So it was kind of like you couldn't live without it as well as you could with it. So that was really the idea that inspired us me to go all in on this idea. And that, in short, is basically for people who want to hold Bitcoin, there's a way for it to be preserved and held as collateral and saved forever so they can get more of it and still have access to cash. And for people who want cash that still believe that that's the thing to have, like they have an alternative to real estate or other forms of cash flow, those two make a really good match. And that's what we do. It's a
Did you
long way
feel?
of getting to the story.
Nah, I mean, look, the backstory is always necessary and appreciated. Did you? When did you feel vindicated? Like I knew I wasn't crazy. This Bitcoin was actually a thing. Like now you see all these different countries starting their strategic Bitcoin reserves and buying crypto and
Yep.
putting it in their own version of Fort Knox. Like when did you feel like okay, this idea paid off?
It's been a rocky road. And I would say when I felt vindicated, like we should be vindicated, was 2021, 21 million Bitcoin, year 2021. I thought for sure, like, this is it. We've made it. Maybe not everybody gets it, but we're going to prove this out. And then we had some really bad stuff happen, bad political landscape, bad actors, bad everything in 2022. And it was really kind of a big setback. And a lot of good people got set back in this. And it was like, nope, I guess we haven't proved it yet. Come to this year, to 2025, and I really feel that has come full circle, specifically around the accounting practicing being fixed. The type of people who come in and talk about it now is the majority of people, I would say, that understand finance and are educated. You got the politicians, which are always slow to come around fully. I would say giving better support than I would have imagined, right? That I'd hoped for before. But yeah, I feel very vindicated right now on every level. Like I think the thesis of saving Bitcoin on a treasury balance sheet and as an asset is like absolutely now a thing that people recognize if you look. It doesn't mean everybody knows that though. And it's actually interesting that 95% of all Bitcoin that's ever going to exist have been mined, but 95% of the world's population doesn't have it. Like that still tells you like, okay, we're there, but we're not there. There's still this long curve, like the future's here, but it's not widely distributed. I think with Bitcoin's vindication, we're here, but the adoption is still, we're going to see a lot more to come.
In your own words, how would you define or describe salt lending?
So basically, you've got a platform that allows for saving and investing. You have somebody like myself who has Bitcoin that wants to keep buying Bitcoin. I get paid in Bitcoin. So thus I need to either keep selling Bitcoin, which I don't want to do, or I can get access to cash and borrow against it, which I will do and do want to do. On the other side of that, that's only allowed because we have people who have dollars and they want to put yield up and they want to lend it out and they want to return. Never had a default rate ever. So over collateralization of the asset that is protecting the downside is a really good model. I think it's the best model around when it comes to lending. And in simple terms, it's just simply that ability for two different parties to have liquidity that help each other out in a very synergistic way. And a lot of times you have people on both sides of that, where they have Bitcoin and dollars, most people, by definition. And that is the simplest way to describe it. It's just a financial saving platform, wealth generation platform, and or lending platform.
How has the vision for salt lending evolved over the years, if any?
You know, the actual core mission and the North Star hasn't changed at all. I would say how to get there is where things are complicated. You know, you have this simple idea of I want to build a touchscreen phone, but the iPhone is extremely complicated underneath the hood, right? So there's a ton of changes and pivots and ways that we've thought about how to get there and grow through political landscapes and licensing regimes and overregulation, underregulation, everything you think of. But as far as the actual core vision of it, nothing's actually really fundamentally changed, with the exception that now we have stablecoins kind of entering the picture in a I would say soon to be approved and or if not widely adopted way. That's the idea of a digital dollar. And we have Bitcoin being adopted to the point where it's full blown becoming institutionalized, if you will, at a big clip. I do think we went through a little bit of a curve testing out a lot of other coins. You and I talked a little bit about this before, but we do look for the ability for whatever people perceive as their savings account and value to be valued. We're not going to make that decision for people. However, we do have to look at the metrics in the market. And right now, Bitcoin just absolutely wins on this front of being the best saving asset, period. So we've evolved away from kind of, although we still have a portfolio and we think that will always exist of assets that people will own. And in fact, I would say that we're going to see a lot more assets go on chain and online. For the most part, it's still just that simple one asset that seems to be the best performing asset against anything else ever in human history when it comes to a store value. And then the other asset, which is the best performing currency that the human race has ever spent, that circulates as the reserve asset.
Man, it's very interesting, right? Because I say for the past, let's say like 200 or 300 years, um, the world of finance has talked about saving is bad, investing is good.
Mhm.
And now the entire ideology is being flipped upside down where a lot of people are pushing saving Bitcoin. And that's pretty much all you need to do. And it does sound too good to be true. Like if you're looking at it over uh again over the past 300 years, you're like, man, just saving in Bitcoin seems too easy. It sounds
It's
too
actually
sweet, man.
very hard to do.
What's your
It
thoughts on
sounds
that?
too easy. Yeah. So this is a great topic that can go in so many directions. So I'm just going to throw a couple out that I find really interesting. And really what we're talking about is the invention or the discovery of a infinitely finite scarce resource that's never existed, right? So like this is the first time in human history that we've been able to have provable scarcity that's never existed. So that's amazing. But then you have the overlap of a deflationary asset, meaning there's a specific finite scarce amount, can never be more, and an inflationary amount of everything else. So now you say, well, which one of these is actually stable? And then what is it true what the economist's been saying forever about deflationary death spirals and all this? Well, I, for one, want to see it play out because we don't know. It's all been theory until now. And I don't think we're quite yet in a world where we see what a deflationary currency is, because Bitcoin's not being used as a currency, although I do believe it will be. We do definitely have proof of its performance against inflationary currencies, and it's smoking them hands down, has been for 15 years straight. And I don't see that that will change at all. And so if you take that overlap there's this gradually, then suddenly, I think, reality where more and more people kind of add themselves over to a new platform or a new network or a new way of doing things. And sometimes it's very slow for a while, and then suddenly overnight, everybody's buying from Amazon, right? Before we didn't have Amazon, or everybody's using Ubers before we didn't have Uber. I do think that is more probable than not with cryptocurrency. I really believe it will eat up all of finance 100%. And then the question is, well, what does a world like that look like? I think you're going to see a deflationary asset that does seem too good to be true from savings. However, we could riff on that for a long time because in all the 15 years I've been doing this, the one thing I would tell people, if I could go back and tell myself that advice, I would say just don't do anything besides work for Bitcoin, invest in Bitcoin, do whatever you can for Bitcoin and save it. As soon as you start feeling like you got to go do that thing you just described, which is what we were all taught, is that you can't just save, you got to go invest. You are just taking on undue risk, and it's very hard to beat something that has that kind of performance, right? It's very hard. In fact, I don't believe any business can over a long horizon unless they also have that Bitcoin on the balance sheet. I don't think any company over, say, 50 years can outbeat Bitcoin. I don't think it's possible. So that in itself fundamentally we could riff on for 10 minutes and will blow people's minds if you think it out, right? Because that tells you where it's going. I just think that we're living in very interesting times that have never existed before that we know of in this realm that we live in. So, from our understanding, we are witnessing the adoption of something brand new that's never existed in human history. And we need to treat it with that respect and understanding that this is not just another growth tech stock. This is actually something very different. And that's going to have a profound impact, I believe, over if you just fast forward another 15 years, right? And that's
I'm,
still short-term thinking.
absolutely, man. And I think you made a good point about different companies maybe not adopting Bitcoin because we've seen now so many different companies adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets and a few companies solely basing their business model off of just accumulating Bitcoin.
Right. So imagine
Yeah.
two companies, right? I like to do this scenario just to do a thought experiment. You have company A, company B. They're both have businesses, whatever they do, they decide, hey, we're just going to go start buying Bitcoin. And this other one says, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. They both do the same thing. I believe that one is going to absolutely outperform the other. Now, take a small mom and pop shop, like which most of the world actually is smaller businesses. Say you got two coffee shops. One coffee shop that starts having every dollar that comes in go straight to Bitcoin. They have somebody like Salt that's giving them cash that they're paying their bills. They start to create this wedge, Bitcoin advantage or ability to start stacking. The other one doesn't. I don't think it is possible for one to win with the other. And what I believe will be true is you already see it happening is that the companies will start to realize like, hey, no fair. I want some of that too. That's I'm never going to be able to keep up if you just can go fund every new location and I can't, or whatever the scenario is. And that becomes this game theory arms race that plays out, which means to me seems like it will just accelerate the speed and pace at which people will start putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And then I would go even further and say, like a company like mine, where every dollar we bring in, all we pride ourselves on every day, I have one mission: get more Bitcoin than I had yesterday. Every hour, I'm thinking, did we get any more Bitcoin or did we spend more money? And if you think about that as a premise versus a company that's just buying Bitcoin, they're not comparable. One has a native engine where all the revenue turns into Bitcoin and the other doesn't. So that means all the revenue is going to start turning into Bitcoin too. It's just a matter of time. And if everybody's issuing their stock and issuing their debt and equity and debt to buy Bitcoin and everybody's taking the revenue and turning into Bitcoin, like, well, how long does that last before everything just starts converting to Bitcoin as the asset? And that opens up the conversation to the denominator of settlement, global settlement changing. Like what are you measuring things in? Are you measuring in dollars? Are you measuring in oil barrels? Are you measuring in Bitcoin? I think it will eventually become Bitcoin. And the sooner that people realize that, the better they will do because it's very hard to reprogram yourself on anything, especially when the entire world is priced in one thing and you've been taught one thing. It's a big learning curve to just start thinking differently. Thinking of Bitcoin will just change who you are because it will make you have to rethink everything. It's fundamentally almost the opposite of almost every normal financial education investment strategy that I've ever heard of, simply because it's just thinking in a different denominator, meaning it's thinking and measuring things against this scarce, infinitely finite resource that never changes, where one Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin, there's only 21, versus everything else, which is constantly being created and inflated and destroyed and changing and moving around.
It's man, you make a lot of great points with that. With those comments, I just saw a tweet, and today is July 7th. I just saw a tweet, or I'm sorry, today is
Yeah.
July 8th, but this tweet came out on the 7th from Grant Cardone, right? And he said,
Yeah.
"Is anyone concerned that everyone seems to be buying convertible bonds to buy Bitcoin?" So that was an interesting tweet. I just saw it a couple hours ago, and I still have to take some time to break it down and see what he means or what exactly that tweet means. But I'm wondering, is he kind of referring to something like the housing crisis, like a bubble where everybody's
Maybe.
over leveraging themselves to get
Maybe.
into crypto, kind of like what happened with those subprime loans back in '08. So
Yep.
I didn't think of that before, but I thought it was an interesting tweet. Like, oh, okay, that could be
So you could
something.
take that two ways though. So yes, I agree. Like the way I would interpret is anybody concerned that everybody's just taking they're issuing debt to go convert into Bitcoin, right? You could take that two ways. You could either say, is there some kind of over leverage that's going to happen and it will create cascades of liquidations or some kind of correction, right? Some form of, is this a concern where people are being too bullish and or optimistic and that's going to have a reset? But you could also take it the other way, which is, hey, are you not concerned that everybody's starting to do this and you're not? Which is also a way that I would interpret it. And that's actually the way I would have naturally gravitated towards. And so I think it's one of these, you could take it both ways, and you
Yeah,
could actually we could talk about that in quite great detail because that has a lot of implications, some of which we've already talked about, some of which we have not. I think Grant is very smart in both marketing, sales, understanding trends, and real estate, without a doubt. He's now, I feel like, come over into the Bitcoin world. I think he had a false start in
mm,
2021. He was kind of still going, nah, I'm going to have my real estate, bro. Like, have fun with that Bitcoin. But now I think he's clearly on the other side of this and saying, yeah, I'm gonna buy Bitcoin and I'm gonna take X amount of revenue to buy Bitcoin. And I don't usually see people reverse the other way, right? His brother
yeah,
also talks Bitcoin all day long. He's a very cool guy. And I've witnessed this from being before, like when I first got involved with Bitcoin, I couldn't find anybody that was a real person that put their real name online at first.
yeah.
And it was sketch because I'm like, this sounds amazing, but I feel like I'm about to get scammed if I just send off some money onto the internet. Of course I did anyway, but eventually you start meeting real people. And then it was really great to see this new person that you know about, like a Preston Pitch Investor podcast, another one I really like, anything related to investment. And then you start seeing them, you start hearing it in their voice. They start getting orange pilled a little bit. And then what's next thing you know, they're just all in. They give up what they were doing and they go all in. Yeah, I mean, and now we're seeing that even at the political level, right? Like, I really think we're seeing that all the way through everything. And I believe it's actually that we all have the capacity to learn and grow and understand things that are fundamental. And scarcity is a fundamental property in reality. You got time and space, and the amount of mass that takes that space up for how much time is a fundamental. If you look at what scarcity is, that's really for the first time ever, this measuring stick that you can measure everything in something that doesn't move, that is going to catch on and people are going to keep on getting orange pilled, I believe, one by one by one by one. Eventually, it's just going to be everybody. So I think I would take it. It's interesting. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I would take it more that he's saying, hey, is everybody not concerned that this is going to like accelerate things, right? That could lead to a reversal, but it doesn't necessarily have to, because if you do it like MicroStrategy did, Saylor and or other people, what I would advise too would be, don't put yourself at risk of liquidation. Take on the leverage in the way that you're just accelerating the inevitable of purchasing, but don't put yourself in a forced liquidation position ever. And that's true of real estate or anything, right? Like you don't ever want to be the one that gets pushed to close, have an event that you didn't plan. You always want to be in planning. But what are your thoughts? Love to hear you.
My initial thought was something similar to a real estate bubble. And that could be because I'm just in the financial service space where it's still a little bit antiquated, not yet fully caught on to.
We're all scared of that too, right? Like everybody that's ever been through it is very worried of that meltdown scenario,
Yeah,
melt up happen.
yeah, man. I just watched The Big Short for the first time like a month ago. So that's kind of like fresh. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Like he saw a certain
It's a
pattern, and
great
he
movie.
But yeah, man, for sure. But now hearing your perspective too, I'm like, I didn't even think about looking at the flip side. But again, I'm a firm believer in following the wealth. And so whatever I witness, the wealthy doing, I have to take heed to that too and take that into consideration. Because I feel like at different levels, you get access to different information.
Yep. So there's one other riff on that too, though. So like with the real estate, I would say the real estate market has been somewhat not really impacted by Bitcoin like the corporate tech stocks have. Like if you look at technology companies, they always see it first because they're in technology. So they got people that are seeing this and talking about it sooner. Then you look at kind of corporate treasury and players that have this problem of too much cash, they go next. Then you got GameStop, you got the rest of them. Like they will follow suit. Figma, I think, just announced they have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I think most tech companies probably do. We're going to see a lot more of those. But the real estate market has kind of been so tried and true in its own industry, and it's so diverse. Like everybody's got real estate somewhere in their life, whether they're on this whatever side they're on it. I think you're going to see a bigger trend. And in fact, this is something I'm pretty bullish on, is that if you add Bitcoin to a real estate portfolio, it improves the makeup of that real estate, meaning hard money in real estate financing is expensive, risky. You have to be a professional to know how to do it. And you eventually have this stack that people go through from bootstrapping to getting refinanced to then eventually getting banknotes and mezzanine debt and all the rest. You add Bitcoin to the mix, and once people start to recognize it, people like Grant who are influential, and I don't know if you saw this, but another thing that you should look up is just I think a week ago, Fannie and Freddie Mac, the bill that passed that would have to include that on your ability to qualify for a mortgage. I mean,
Right.
that is another really big deal that
Yeah.
tells you like, okay, so imagine that's like to me vindicated back to that point about when I first started talking to bankers, I was trying to convince them that Bitcoin should be accounted for when I want to get a loan. And they were like, you're nice, but this is you don't understand. They were just telling me like, sorry, little kid, you don't know. Like everybody on the board's white and 75 years old. They don't know what the hell you're talking. But I think now the time has come with that real estate market is giant, and I think it could completely change the way that financing happens in that industry, which should be massive.
And it's interesting too, right? Because these government agencies are starting to recognize Bitcoin as an asset or recognize Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but they won't recognize your a personal residence on the balance sheet. So I think that says a lot in it too. Like, I think Grant Cardone is a firm believer that your personal home is not a asset; it's a
Yeah, it's
liability.
liability. It's a utility at
Yeah,
best, right?
yeah,
It's a utility
utility.
at
That's a good
best,
way to put it. That's a
right?
good.
Like
That's a good way to put it.
I think it is because like it's kind of like rent to own a car, lease a car, buy a car, whatever. Like if you do that math, you put, go geek out on it. Odds are you take an average of large numbers, most people are going to end up being in the same boat eventually, meaning that the car is eventually going to break down. There's a cost at which it must be serviced, and at some point in time, kind of all washes out, and then it's like a utility or a public service or something that just becomes arguably, why not just have an Uber ride instead of owning your own car and everything in between? I think that is also true here in that, a home, what your point is that, and I agree with that full heartedly. I think most people that think they have an asset and they bought their own personal real estate and home they're living in should not think about it like an asset. They should think about it like maybe you're capturing and keeping up with inflation, but really you're there to live in it. And so you should enjoy it and you should take care of it. But it's not an investment of cash flow. It's not the same as owning doors that people pay you rent on. It's not the same as owning loans that are packaged up in the bond market. It's not an investment in that way. I just don't believe, unless it can outpace, and it hasn't, the global inflation rate and the standard, index S&P 500. Is it really an asset? No, it's not. It's a utility and or a liability.
How do you balance or like if you're talking to someone about Bitcoin or crypto, how do you balance between capital appreciation and cash flow? Because most people, especially I imagine like if they're younger,
I'll
you
give you the
make a
answer. See, the original like 60-40 split between risk assets and bonds, right? Like equities versus bonds. That's kind of
right.
like I'd say out the window. But at the time, it made sense why people would say that. And really, when you're younger, you can take more risks, you have more time, so you can make that logical explanation, or you can reason your way through, hey, it makes sense. It's okay. I'm going to Vegas because I'm only 21. I'm gonna play it up a bit. It doesn't mean it's true logic. It just means that it makes sense. If you kind of do that same overlap now and say, all right, well, the 60/40 blend of bonds to equity maybe has some relevance, but is no longer really a good model to follow. And you introduce tech, Bitcoin, deflationary elements like AI and or other trends, and you say, okay, now what should this look like? Not financial advice, but I would be the one that says, while you can work and earn as much as you can, do the best work you can, do the things that you find valuable and that you want to spend your time doing, because that is the one thing you cannot get more of is time, right? And that really truly will never be trumped, I don't think. Second to that, save that time that you worked hard in Bitcoin because there isn't a better savings technology. Uh-oh, did I get kicked out? Are you still there?
No, I'm
No,
still
sorry,
here.
I had a pop up. Okay, so um, if you think about it that way, right, I think that it's just all a matter of where are you at in life. If you're working, you got cash flow and you can save. If you want to augment that, like I do, I get paid in Bitcoin and then I just borrow cash to keep paying the bills because I would rather have the spread. I don't mind the debt. I just want to have the asset growing more than the debt. It keeps me responsible, but that for some people would think is higher risk, right? Some people get, I think usually later in life, that normal 60/40 becomes more applicable where you would want to be on the cash flow side of it. Maybe you want a lot more of the just mailbox money. Right? And I see that a lot. Like the older clientele we have fits the bill more of what you would see in kind of the traditional world of people just want that dividend. I just tell me I got fixed income, right? The fixed income product becomes very important for people who want to get off the treadmill of working but need some amount of cash flow. I just think that if you only do that, you're going to miss out on a lot because you're going to get smoked because everything's measured in dollars. So you should do that as much as you can get to your quality of life you want and probably no more. That's me, right?
Yeah.
That's what I would do. I would say if I could get to where I can live within my means, I'm never spending more than I'm making, but I've got cash flow that covers my expenses, and I'm never going to have to sell the assets they're appreciating. As long as that now I have enough of those assets that over a long horizon they're going to give me the extra sale and the win in the sales. But I think depending on where you're at in life, you could answer that question. It's based on facts and circumstances of everybody's unique circumstances. I think it's interesting just because I have to say this. You and I were talking about this earlier about that, the mindset of don't hold your money, don't save, right? I still think that that is actually the biggest risk is that people feel like they must go do something. I have to go get cash flow. I got to invest. I gotta. And I really think that maybe you don't. Maybe you got to just work hard at the thing you love doing, get a good savings account and know that that's gonna you're adding value to a battery that everybody else in the world that has that same thesis is backing each other. So you can go to bed knowing, I don't have to throw all of it towards this cash flow idea and speculate because most people don't win that game, right? It forces you to become a risk taker, and eventually you're like day trading, trying to make your side hustle. You might as well be in Vegas, just putting it on black or red, because it's like at some point, you're just taking on way too much risk. But then that's my mentality. I think I come from that old school of just save, and I'm just happy that now we have a way to do that, because before we didn't.
When you're working with clients, how do you assess risk when lending against volatile assets like Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is volatile from the perspective of if you have an obligation against it, right? That there's a relationship, the loan to value we would call it. The price of one thing is affecting the loan to value. And so you have principal versus your collateral. However, we have like kind of three different tools that we allow for people to pick what they want. And there are people who want the volatility. That's their friend. They're looking at it and saying, I'm protecting myself on the downside by taking on this risk. I'm going to put a stop loss in. People start thinking about options markets and others, right? So you have a category that's a spectrum across the whole board. For those people, they're better off knowing exactly where they're going to get stomped out and or sold because to them, it's not about protecting against volatility. It's about making money at volatility. In the middle, you've got people who don't want that. They're just looking to save. They're probably in that blend we were just talking about where they need to keep saving, but they also want to get cash flow. They've got a life. they're working, so they can't just be there watching the market. They can't sit there and try to trade the market or whatever. They're not available all the time, so they can't afford to just get liquidated or something like that. They don't want to be doing that. They're probably living their life. That's the middle of the road. And then we have the people that just to say at all costs, no matter what, I want this as forever money. I'm never selling my Bitcoin. I don't want any possibility of being liquidated whatsoever. We have a product for them too, where we can just turn that off. So it really depends on, again, who you are. I just advise that people either have their own thesis, their own strategy, and or understand their own risk and get educated. They understand exactly what they're getting into, and they pick the products with them and their financial advisor, whoever else they depend on to take the information we give them and then show them, hey, there's always options. You need to pick the best one. Here's what we can give you as far as information to make this easier. At the end of the day, it's all about your own circumstances, right? There's no one size fits all. Yeah, so we don't do a lot of exactly advising, really. We just kind of show people what we can offer and make sure they understand it and let them kind of build that into their existing financial life.
Man, this is a very interesting conversation for me. I know I'm jumping around a lot.
I like it.
I, I
We
want to
keep
ask you, was Bitcoin ever decentralized and is it still decentralized now?
Yeah, Bitcoin is definitely decentralized. Okay. And we have proof in this historically in several circumstances where I think Bitcoin has this interesting element that I call anti-fragile, people call anti-fragile. It just means the more you try to kind of kill it, the stronger it gets, the smarter it gets. It kind of self-evolves in a way. So there have been times where there was this big fear about a 51% attack. Could it get centralized? Could it get taken over? Could it die? And the incentives just really don't prove out that way, meaning when there's enough at stake and there starts to become a problem, a network that, or an organism, I would say even, that wants to continue on, it will find a way to adjust and heal and adapt. And we've seen that over and over and over. Why is that relevant to decentralized or not? It's that the whole premise and value proposition of having censorship resistant access 24/7 available to anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you believe in, doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. If you have internet and electricity, which you would need for that, then you should be able to get into a network that's fully open. And in order for that to exist, you have to have it be decentralized, and you cannot have it under any centralized control. And so I would say, by definition, that nobody's been able to take it over and or kill it, which every government has tried, I would say, in some capacity, or at least assumed that it would get murdered, take it behind the barn. The reason they're adopting it now is probably now it's like that old laugh at them, then ignore them, then try to fight them, and then you win. I feel like we're about to win, and they were fighting it. And if that were not decentralized, we would not have seen that. In fact, if Satoshi had gone and asked for permission and formed a company and been centralized, it would not have existed. Nobody would give it permission. It had to be permissionless and it had to be decentralized. And I think that it must always remain that way. And I would actually say that if you look at the statistics, there are more miners and online nodes and people that are spinning up processing and layer twos and businesses built on this. Like every one of those in a way is a scaling element. In fact, I even call the treasury companies like a layer two, if you will, right? An ETF in a way is kind of like another version of a layer two scaling for Bitcoin. It has motivated humans to continue to work for it in so many different ways that it makes us all stakeholders that all of us would lose if it loses. So like nobody would want to change that. And if you changed and made it centralized, which I don't think you could, you would kill that because that's part of the value proposition. Like you really can't change anything too dramatically. And people make the argument that it's centralized. I don't believe that's true at all, right? I don't think there's any proof that that's really true. Otherwise, I'd say, well, then go turn it off. Go call the CEO, see if there's somebody there.
No, that's a good point, man. I definitely understand that perspective, and I also understand how people can think it is now centralized just because it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, and it looks
Yep.
like it's going to continue to head in that direction. And it's like once the government gets involved with something or like starts buying it, it just makes it you just like, oh man, they took the coolness out
They're
of
gonna
it.
ruin
But
it. Yeah. Oh
yeah,
man,
man,
why did the adults have to show up? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But are there any regulatory How do you navigate the regulatory landscape in the crypto space right now?
So in my particular situation, I would say as a backdrop, Bitcoin has been over-regulated, meaning when in doubt, you would go ask a lawyer to say, hey, I don't know if this is a commodity, I don't know if it's a currency, I don't know if it's security, advise on me. And they'd be like, well, to be safe, you better treat it as all of them. And you'd be like, wait a minute. Yeah, and by the way, register it with FinCEN and get a hold of FINRA. And you're just like, oh, you go through every one of the agencies and they all want a piece of it, right? Every agency has wanted a piece of Bitcoin and they've all fought over it in a bit. I think the SEC gave up really early. Comptroller, OCC has just kind of tried to pretend it doesn't exist. The narrative is definitely keep it as an asset. Don't call it a currency because then you're not threatening all the governance. But at the same time, it's got every type of regulation you can imagine coming at it. So if anything, it was never the wild, wild west for very long, right? It was always kind of like when in doubt, that lack of regulatory clarity actually makes for a much more burdensome scenario. It's much more of a bad scenario because you have to go get overly compliant regulation and have licenses for stuff that doesn't really apply all the time. Now, in lending, it's for the most part not really about the assets so much as it's about is it money transmission? Is it money? That's a whole debate that people are still having. Um, where exactly is the disclosure? The regulatory part is something that I don't really actually find that interesting anymore, but I live in that world where I've got, my FBI fingerprints and everything else are on so many different licenses and applications a year that it's the opposite of what you would imagine getting involved with Bitcoin for, which is kind of ironic in a way. It's my great sacrifice to help people out is that I ended up, giving up the ability to be a free Bitcoiner so that I could have my fingerprints at every state, you know. So it's a kind of funny reality from my perspective. Although I would say this current U.S. Administration should be, and I think has been recognized for really at least embracing, we got to figure this out and let's make it something that is regulated. That's always been what was needed. That's still what's needed. Most people, I would say, in my opinion, like myself, I can speak for, just want to know what the rules of the game are. Nobody wants to have uncertainty because like nobody's actually trying to break the rules. It's just sketchy if you can't get a yes or a no, and there's risk for not knowing, but you can't know. That's a bad outcome, right? So the more clarity you can bring in the rules, the better people can play the game. And I do feel like we're finally getting to some really clear rules, both on accounting and or treatment. I think that's going to be very good for America. I think we're going to see tons of businesses and companies that can adopt this. I think it's going to accelerate a lot of financial wealth and GDP across the board. It's going to inspire entrepreneurs. Like, trust me, there's nothing worse than trying to go be an entrepreneur and get all excited about building the future, and then you're getting treated like you're a terrorist, right? Like, that's not fun, right? So,
Right.
like, just removing that and suddenly having rules to play by and clear licenses you can get is very liberating, if you will, to kind of go from being overregulated back to just regulated. But that is a long conversation also that can go very deep. And I try not to get too political.
I want to ask you this question for clipping purposes. Um, why do you have conviction in Bitcoin? Why are you trading your fiat dollars for Bitcoin?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a great question. It's a simple question, but it's a great question. Why do I have conviction in Bitcoin? I have conviction because I want to believe that the future can be better than today. I want to believe that there is a reason to go work and build. I want to believe that you can leave things better than you found them. I want to believe that your effort means something, that you can have a legacy, that you can make the world a better place. And all of those things are fundamental to the entrepreneurial spirit, the free spirit, the economic ability for people to dream big. I grew up in a world where when you're young, I believed I lived in the greatest nation and everything was possible, like everything was possible. And so I want to continue to believe that. And for a period of time, especially in 2008, then in 2020, 22, I lost that hope. And Bitcoin gives me hope again because when I go work and if I add value to the world and there's something there, I want to know that it's going to be there tomorrow. I don't want to think it's going to get deflated and I got to wake up in the middle of the night and figure out how to go gamble or speculate or invest. Like I don't believe that that's the best outcome. And so the truth is that I trust it more than anything else. I believe that the scarcity and the network effect of other people who want the same thing, I believe I believe actually every human here wants that. How they go about getting it is different for everybody, depending on where you're at. But I don't know a person alive that doesn't want to go to bed at night feeling like their hard work was going to grow or be worth something, or at least be there in the morning. That's just the peace of mind that we all want. And the only thing that it comes close to that for me in the financial world is Bitcoin. In fact, it's the only thing. I think that does then provide for the reality check, which is you need water, you need health, you need community, you need all these other things that are in the hierarchy of needs. But none of those are possible if you are going to just look at a future where everything gets slowly worse, your health gets worse, your finance gets worse, your ability to work gets worse. Like nobody wants that, right? I think everybody wants that vision of I'm going to have my money working for me. It's just a different version of that with Bitcoin. It's not necessarily working for you, it's just saving for you, right? And that is why I believe in it. I think it is by far the superior savings technology. And the more people that believe that, every single person, just like a cell phone or a network, that anytime somebody new hops online, it adds more value to everybody else online if done right. That there's just that much more connectivity. I think with Bitcoin, that's true. That maybe even more so than the internet, right? A better analogy would be Bitcoin, in that every new person that starts to buy Bitcoin is reinforcing that you got the back of everybody else who also is saving there, right? So that it has a reinforcing effect that brings more of that peace of mind and being able to sleep well at night, and ultimately just believing and having hope for the future. That's really why.
What's next for Salt Lending?
So for Salt, I think the biggest thing we're focused on right now is, of course, every day is how to much more Bitcoin can we acquire? We want investors to come on board. We want to help people. We want to continue to grow and just stack Bitcoin and help other people do the same and then get their cash flow right. But for us, the big one right now is the start where you and I started talking, which is about staking coins like Ethereum versus Bitcoin where there's no yield. We have a way that naturally our business generates yield, and that yield can then go to Bitcoin. We have a way for people to actually park and stake Bitcoin that becomes the protection collateral for people so that they don't have to worry about getting liquidation or anything else. It's a very virtuous cycle that helps reinforce itself. So it's a way of saving and also getting paid to save, which I'm super proud of. We're the first to do that. We've innovated, I would say, most of the first of being first to this market, first to look at different ways to create more tools around that. And now we're doing that again this year, and that's the thing I'm the most excited about. We eventually probably get into many other elements of just partnering with other types of businesses like this, but right now I'm only focused on treasury companies. Anybody who's got Bitcoin on the balance sheet, doesn't matter for GameStop, the United States, uh, Tesla, anybody else that's coming, right? All those, there's, I believe, a way for us to natively generate real Bitcoin economic value, enterprise value for the stakeholders of those businesses in a way that is virtuous and reinforcing to the entire network. Um, and it might seem simple, but we're just kind of still doing the same thing. We just want to continue to do, we're not trying to innovate. We're actually very boring and very predictable. We only have one mission. We just want to do it better than anybody else.
Shawn, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate your insights on crypto lending and building a business at the intersection of finance and blockchain. Man, I enjoyed this episode, man. We have to stay in touch, man. I got to make sure I stay in
Please.
contact with you, brother.
Yeah, this was a really great conversation from start to finish. I could probably keep going. I know it's late, and I really appreciate being here with you and your crew. So hopefully we get to do this again. Just let me know. Hit me up anytime. We're there.
Absolutely.